I'll now yield to my colleague from the great state of California, Susan Davis.
Thank you, and I'm very pleased to have an opportunity to join with my colleague from Arizona, Congresswoman Sinema, to talk about the issue of veteran suicide today, and to do it really from a personal perspective here as well. Daniel Summers, as the Congresswoman noted, was a talented young man, a decorated war hero, and a proud soldier. He asked for help. He did. He reached out to the VA in hopes of being admitted to their suicide prevention unit, but he was informed at that time that there was no inpatient availability, no appointments that he could get right away. And we know now that Daniel took his life just a few days later. His case was brought home to me because his parents, Jean and Howard Summers, live in my former district and actually were friends of mine and friends of people that I knew. When I first heard the story, I was taken, as anybody would be, by their grief, by what had happened, and the fact that we just cannot let that happen again. I think they asked the question that we all ask, how can a young man like that fall through the cracks? How come it was that people didn't respond to him? How can we make a promise to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, when we cannot guarantee placement in a suicide prevention treatment center? Well, one thing I think that we all learn from this is that we have to listen to our constituents. And what I have found to be so rewarding really is that parents with this kind of grief can work through that, and using their son's words to become strong advocates for what is needed in the system. I know, having served on the personnel committees, it was very important to me to work through this issue for a number of years, and we know of the many causes of suicide among those who have served in the military. We know that some of them, in fact, the major reasons, are not necessarily combat stress. Recent reports have shown us that financial hardship and relationship strife are major causes of suicide among the military. But it points out to us how critically important this discussion of mental health is in our country. Sometimes I feel like we've arrived a bit and we plan. I know agencies throughout our country and throughout the VA plan so hard that these kinds of tragedies do not occur. But they do occur, no matter how hard the effort is. And we have got to redouble those efforts. We have got to listen. And we have got to encourage our families to do what they can and what they think is right. I actually think that one of the reasons that the Summers family have become such strong advocates is because people did respond to them. They didn't push them aside and say, well, this is a terrible story and we're sad that it happened. We're not sure that we can do anything about it. We can do something about it, and we will. And I thank my colleague for bringing this forward, and I thank the Summers family as well.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Davis. I now yield to my colleague from Washington State, Congressman Jim McDermott.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, members, I applaud my colleague from Arizona for bringing this issue to the floor. 45 years ago, I was a part of another era when there was a draft, and everybody was subject to that draft. And in 1975, we stopped that draft, and we changed the nature of our military. We made it an all-voluntary military. What we've done in this country is we've taken 1% of the people and said, you volunteered for this, you go and do this for us. And we buy the guns and the bullets and everything else and send them out there, and when they come back, we don't know them. There's a fascinating book called Breach of Trust by a man named Andrew Basovich. He's a colonel in the United States Army. He lost a son in Iraq, and he has written an incisive account of what the problem today is. The subtitle is How Americans Failed Their Soldiers and Their Country. Now, when they return from war, I know about PTSD because I dealt with it as a psychiatrist with people coming back from Vietnam. The kids that were in Apocalypse Now were the kids that came to my clinic. So I saw what people who went through tough war was all about. And what is happening today, in fact, we do it here on this floor, and I'm always uneasy when we do it. We stand up and we have a moment of silence. Well, that's nice, and, you know, we should do it, and we do it. And we thank people for their service. Every veteran finds that as hollow because they didn't go and get us a cup of coffee. They were under orders to go and kill people. And they did it on our behalf. And we bear the responsibility for sending them out there to do it. Everyone on this floor, all 435 of us, bear the responsibility, as does the American public. And when we receive them back, what do they get? Homelessness, joblessness. They get PTSD that may or may not be treated. We say, oh, well, the Veterans Administration will take care of that. You can't put it off on the Veterans Administration. It is all our responsibility. Sexual assault. The number of sexual assaults, you could see a movie called The Hidden War about what happens to women who are now serving in the military. You could look at the total brain injury. Kids who could do all kinds of things come back and can't remember their phone number. They can't remember what their house address is. And they are suffering from things that have happened to them because of the war that they've been involved with. And what happens to them is they get isolated. They get isolated feeling nobody really understands what's going on with me. And for some, suicide seems like the only way. Now, Native American tribes, more ancient people, understood this, that when they sent warriors out to war, they received them back into the tribe. The samurai did it. There was a whole process by which we brought people back in and cleansed them of the guilt of what they've done on our behalf. That collateral damage you read about or hear about is our responsibility as well as theirs for having actually pulled the trigger. We sent them and they did it on our behalf. We cannot get away from that. And we have put a provision in the National Defense Authorization Act that will create a commission for high-level people to look at how we bring these people back. And it's more than just fixing the process at the VA. That's not enough. There is a much larger process of getting us to accept what we are sending people to do. This recent brush we had with Syria, we were about to send people down there to kill people all over the place and say, well, it was the Air Force that did it. I didn't direct the smart bomb to go in there. Yes, you did. Yes, I did. Yes, all of us did. And so when we talk about suicide and these isolated young men and women who come back and feel there's no other hope, it is a much bigger issue. It's an issue of getting them to come and talk to us and tell us what they've done and accept, as we accept, the grief from that kind of event. I thank you for the time, and I encourage you to read the book, Breach of Trust.
Thank you, Congressman. I now will yield to a distinguished colleague from California, Congressman Tony Cardenas.
I'd like to first thank Congresswoman Sinema for bringing us together so we can speak for at least an hour on this very critical and important issue of supporting our veterans now that they're home. This is something that I shouldn't have to talk about. This is something that none of us should have to bring up. but here we are. Too many of our veterans are taking their own lives. Our soldiers and veterans who are all volunteers should not be killing themselves. Too many are, and it is at an epidemic rate. This is entirely unacceptable. While veteran suicide is frequently reported in the press and focused on by the VA, it is rarely mentioned that last year 349 active duty servicemen and women killed themselves. That is more active duty deaths by suicide than in all combat deaths combined during the same year, 2012, including the deaths in Afghanistan. Alongside our active duty forces, nearly 24 veterans kill themselves every day. That's almost one every hour. That number is going up, not down. A survey by the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America showed that 30% of service members have considered taking their own life, and 45% said they know an Iraq or Afghanistan veteran who has attempted suicide. The Department of Veterans Affairs has devoted some resources to this effort, but more can be done, and it starts right here in Congress. We fund the VA. The VA does not fund itself. It is important that we let military families know that those who have experienced these tragedies, that their experiences matter. We need to provide resources, real support for our veterans and their families. We owe this to the men and women who kept their promise to protect and serve our nation, because we now know and we can see that constant mobilization and combat does not just impact our nation as a whole, but it forever impacts our men and women to whom we owe so much. This Suicide Prevention Month, let us make a true effort to provide mental health support for our veterans and their families. Over $1 trillion have been provided and spent on 2 wars over the last decade. Yet we have dedicated too little, very little, to help our veterans when they return home. $1 trillion sounds like a lot of money. Almost one veteran an hour in this country takes his or her life. What's that price, ladies and gentlemen? What's that value? I believe that we have a backward system in our country where we can pop off and 25 billion, 50 billion, 100 billion, and it keeps going and going and going. And we're creating more and more veterans who come back and who love their country. They would like to come back and feel normal, but they don't feel right. And because of that, they take their life. And we should be ashamed of ourselves because we have the answers. We know the answers. And one of those answers is for Congress to dedicate more money to our veterans so that when they come home, they won't take their life. We have the answers, ladies and gentlemen, but we're not willing to heed the call. We need to do so. Perhaps what we should consider doing in these chambers from now on is every time we spend $1 to go to war, maybe we should dedicate $1 for our veterans when they come back. Fair enough? We lose count of the money we send to war, but we count every penny that we send to the VA. And we squeeze them, and we tell them there's no more. There's always more money for war for some reason. Somehow there's always more money for war, regardless of what the economy is, regardless of how much revenue we have. There's always more money for war, but there's never enough money for us to dedicate to the veterans who need us, who didn't question us, who we helped them change their lives forever. And for some, they took their life once they came back home and realized that we are not there for them. I hope that we're all listening. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, I hope that we're all listening. And thank you, Congresswoman Sinema, for this opportunity. And I yield back my time.
Thank you, Representative Cardenas. I now yield to my friend and colleague from Southern Arizona, Congressman Ron Barber.
I want to thank my colleague from Arizona, Congresswoman Sinema, for bringing us together this evening on this truly critical issue in our country. Mr. Speaker, I want to speak directly to the men and women who have served this country. To those of you who have borne a decade of war, and to those of you who have endured the psychological scars that these wars have brought, scars from traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress, I know that your wounds, and you know that your wounds, cannot always be seen, but you also know, and I know too, that they are real. I implore you to consider the grief and loss, the sadness that your families will feel if you're no longer with them. They love you. They want you to live. I implore you, suicide is not the answer. For 32 years, I worked in the field of mental health services. I know from the thousands of success stories that mental illness, post-traumatic stress, emotional issues are treatable. You can recover. If you are hurting and need help, it is there for you. It is there in your friends and your family members, and it is there in the professional services offered in your community and at the Veterans Administration. If you learn that someone is contemplating suicide, you have a responsibility to intervene. Let them know how much they mean to you. Help them get the services they need. It is everyone's responsibility to stop this terrible tragedy that is occurring every single day. As has been said already, 22 men and women who have served us in uniform are committing suicide when they return home to civilian life. You each deserve the full resources of this government and of your communities and of your friends, and it is there for you. Here in Congress, I am very pleased to say that while we talk a lot about gridlock, and we talk a lot about not getting things done, and the lack of bipartisanship, this is one issue on which we are truly in a bipartisan coalition. We are fighting for you to make sure that you get the support and the help and the gratitude that you deserve after serving our country so bravely. Just this week, I was deeply honored to welcome Congresswoman Tammy, she was amazing, Tammy Duckworth to my district. When I think about the greeting that she received when we went to the University of Arizona from the veterans who saw her courage, I knew that she was an inspiration not only to them, but to veterans all over the country, a great model of someone who has been through so much and yet has found a reason to live and to serve her country. We went to the Veterans Center at the University of Arizona, where veterans were helping other veterans not only deal with the transition back into civilian life and into school life, but also to deal with the emotional issues that they have as they make that transition. Help is there. It is there for each and every one of you who have served us so well. And I implore you, look for the help. Give the help. This is everyone's responsibility to reach out to the men and women who have served us and to extend a helping hand and to get them to the services that they need. They can and will be treated, and treatment will, in fact, help them succeed, and they will, in fact, go through this terrible time that they're dealing with when they contemplate suicide. I want to thank the gentlelady from Arizona once again for bringing us together to talk about this very important topic to all Americans, and I yield back.
Thank you so much, Congressman Barber.